unhappy. And typically when someone says, well, how is it? Our training as people of color, as women, is to sublimate our needs and to just lean into the happy and to think through, what did I do wrong, or was I imagining it? But what I think is so effective about our relationship was that Lara and I tell each other the truth. We are incredibly transparent with one another. And so in this car ride, I looked at her and I said, look, here's the problem. I was in that meeting, you were in that meeting, but they only saw you. They did not talk to me. They would not engage me, and they discounted my ideas. And it wasn't because we were girls. And so we had the conversation about how Lara and I both practice how to assert yourselves in meetings as women, but she had not encountered before what it meant to be a woman of color in that space and how that worked. So Lara, do you want to pick it up from there?
Sure. And I think, what was interesting is, I'll be honest, I didn't notice it. And it's because I was so focused on delivering, our solution and getting the sale, that I was so thankful that Stacey was willing to tell me, because when I said, what's wrong, if she had just said nothing, I wouldn't be any smarter the next time than I was that time. And so by Stacey saying, this is how I saw the meeting, it was the first time that I was able to see it through her eyes, but in a way that wasn't judgmental on me for missing it. It was really more, let me share how I saw it. And I shared how I saw it. And then I realized that I had missed an entire lens that wasn't my natural lens. And so what I appreciated the most is we quickly took that conversation from not, accusatory, why did you miss it? Instead, it was, okay, so what do we do next time? How do we go into the next meeting? What can I do? What can we do together to prevent that dynamic from unfolding again? And so, from that point on, we came up with strategies that we would use to make sure that neither of us were ever sidelined, and I was much more sensitive to it. So.
No, that's great. And the magic of your partnership seems to be captured in one, kind of sentence, right? There's a lot of stuff in that book, but the one thing that really got me was you say respect but challenge, right? And so obviously different backgrounds. I'd love for you to talk about how to do that. How do you guys practice it, and what would you recommend to some of the Valence members?
Yeah, so we joke that Stacey and I are the yes and the but, because I never hear an idea that I'm not, oh gosh, guess what we could do. And Stacey's always like, well, wait a minute, like, what are the things we would need to make it happen? And I think, to your point, this idea of question something, challenge it, but respect that at the end of the day, despite the fact that we may want the same outcome, how we would go about getting there is very different, shaped by our own individual experiences in life, but we always respect the best of intentions. We both know that we respect each other to always want to make the situation better. And I think when you keep that grounding, we can challenge each other on how you would do it. We have those conversations all the time. They're fun. And we both recognize that progress always comes from juxtaposing those opposites. And if you can juxtapose them in a way that you are curious about the nuances, but not critical of the intent, then it becomes a fairly safe way to have those challenges and not make it personal.
I would add that the other piece and the practical part of how we do this is that we talked about our values. We actually had a list of these are the things we believe, these are the ways we operate. And it shouldn't be a long list. If it's a long list, then it's not values. It's a manifesto, and you should be in a very different line of work. And so we were clear with one another. Here are the key issues for us, how we think about time, how we think about integrity. And we gave ourselves a handful of rules, but we also had a partnership agreement. We wrote down how we dealt with one another. We talked about money up front. In a partnership that's based on your brain power, how are we going to value each person's thought? Lara has a background in business. I have a background in law, but she's got this, these secondary skills, and I have secondary skills that are compatible and sometimes immutable. So how do we value that? Well, we decided We split everything 50-50, but you get the most important thing in a small firm is clients. So whoever brings in the client gets 15%. That made all of the other conversations a lot easier because there would be clients that I brought in where Lara was going to do all of the work because it was not my area of expertise. But we never had a fight over, well, I did 17 hours and you did 4 hours. No, you brought in the client. So we split it 50-50, and we believed each other that over time, there would be some degree of balance in what we put in, because part of respect is actually trusting one another and trusting that you're coming from the same place. So to Lara's point, we can challenge each other because we never have to have the a priori conversation of what's the motive.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, I think it's, again, having those hard conversations, but it sounds like you documented it as well, right? So it wasn't just, well, I remember.
She's a lawyer.
We write everything down.
We write everything down.
Because memory is fickle, and we misremember our histories all the time. I believe in documentation.
Yeah, I would say that my wife reminds me of that quite frequently. and it's, the crazy thing is that she's right, but so I think the documentation is important, but obviously having the tough conversations, is critical as well. One of the things that was very interesting to me, so I moved back to Atlanta in 2013. I left in 96 and then moved back for a year in 2013. And when I was raising money for my venture, it seemed like Atlanta was at least at this time, right? So now almost 10 years ago, but it seemed like it was early stage private equity versus venture capital. And you guys talk about your business at the time, Nourish, being a second class startup. I'd love for you to kind of talk about that because, again, I think it's very relatable to a lot of Black women, Black men who don't have technical backgrounds. They see this kind of big shiny object, but their business might be a bit different. So I'd love for you to talk about that business and how you manifested it to come to life.
Sure. When we started Nourish was a spill-proof bottled water for children. So there was nothing high-tech about it. But here we were in Atlanta in the shadows of the largest beverage giant. You would think there would be an appreciation for the fact that such a company could create value. And what we found when we started talking to family offices and individual investors and, private equity groups, et cetera, is there was sort of this immediate dismissal that we weren't a sexy high-tech startup. And, I do think that we have an incredible opportunity, and I know, Guy, you and I have both been involved with this, to think about this idea of inclusive entrepreneurship. And inclusive has to be on every axis. So yes, it has to be inclusive as it relates to the founders themselves, race, gender, et cetera. But we also have to be more inclusive of businesses that may not fit what the hot topic of Shark Tank is at the moment, or what the hot topic in Silicon Valley is at the moment, because value can be created in almost any industry, in any industry. And the minute we constrict that, we by definition disadvantage many women and people of color because their experience doesn't lend themselves to that one teeny tiny area of expertise. And if you're starting a business in another sector, that business is the mechanism to create value for the community, to create generational wealth. And the minute we disregard those as not sexy enough or not high tech enough, we're actually doing a disservice to the whole community.
I think the other piece that I would extend what she said with, one is that we often don't recognize where our access to capital begins. And that's because it's typically hidden. There is a secret door and no one has given us the map. And so particularly for communities that are not of the investor class, we often have to find allies to get us the introductions. With our company, we were coming about at the time that Vitamin Water and Smart Water, all these water companies were getting capital and were starting to blossom. And so the other challenge was that we didn't fit the known mold of even a water company. That can be either an innovation or it can be a disadvantage. And part of the seeking of money meant that we had to recognize that in the VC space, it was absolutely a disadvantage. They didn't know what to do with us, so they did nothing with us. But because of Lara's relationships, we were able to find private investors in the angel space who were willing to come in early. And I think that's the place where so many disadvantaged or minority businesses have to begin. We've got to find alternative forms of capital to be able to sit at the table where angel investing starts. And we just have to, until we can start producing our own, until we change money in America, that's going to be part of the beginning. And so I think it's a sobering reality. But once you know that that's the challenge, then you figure out what is the thing I have to show to get to the next stage of capital. Because you cannot solve it all with friends and family investment. That is not possible. But you can do a prototype. You can do a first stage. You can do something that then allows you, that with your target being getting to the place where you can start to attract the attention of that next stage of money.
Right.
And I think Stacey, one of the things that's important about that, Stacey nor I came from a deep friends and family network that could write checks, right? So I know a lot of people sit around and say, oh, this friends and family sounds great, but my friends and family don't have a lot of money, and neither of ours did. But what we recognized is, the more people you talk to, the more their network becomes your network, right? So don't be afraid to share your idea with someone. Believe me, they're too busy to try to steal it. Share it with someone who might say, well, I know someone, and then they know someone. And so, use other people's networks. But to Stacey's point, it's what piece can I do on a shoestring that gets me to the next level? Now, we were before 3D printing. Gosh, that would have been nice if it had existed. But what we had was duct tape and some inventiveness. So we drew the bottle that we wanted it to look like. We duct taped some things together, and we found ourselves in front of the parody shops, right? The people this family-owned business in Atlanta that runs a lot of airport stores. And we did our little dog and pony show with our duct tape and our drawings, and they agreed to buy it. That was the key, because now we could go to an investor and say, we have a willing customer. And so I do think it's getting creative about how you get that one thing, that customer that agrees to take a chance on you, or a friend of a friend of a friend who knows somebody. You can't be bashful. You've got to just keep asking to borrow other people's networks until you get there.
It actually sounded like, when I was reading the book, you not only duct taped and kind of modeled the bottle, you actually acted out the whole entire process, right?
We did. Absolutely.
Be the bottle, yes.
That was brilliant, right?
And we also borrowed intellectual capital from our friends, and that was important too. But when you do that, you've got to make sure you're recognizing that you're borrowing, and there's going to be some reciprocity. And I think one of the places where we lose friendships and lose opportunity is that we'll take and forget to give back. And so we have to remember that investment is not just the cash we get, it's also the intellectual capital, and being willing to acknowledge and value that equal to what else gets you to that finish line is so critical.
I think it's underutilized too, truthfully, in the Black community. It's like, everyone wants to look for the hookup. I won't say, not everyone, but I think the reciprocity, again, is really, really important. And I think, again, paying it forward is also a really critical element of that. I want to go back to one of the things that you guys talked about earlier, right? So Lara, Georgia Tech, Stacey, Spelman, right? The quickest way to get to the AUC, where Spelman is, from Georgia Tech, is basically driving by the Coca-Cola building, right? So and literally, it's a huge building that casts a shadow onto Georgia Tech's campus.
Right.
But in your book, you talk about, well, not necessarily going, after Coca-Cola, but looking at the supply chain and some of Coke's suppliers. And so I would love for you to kind of talk about the mindset that really led to you guys realizing that, hey, we don't have to go after Coke. There are, kind of billion-dollar industries that serve Coke.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because Stacey and I managed to get some connections into Coke. And what I think we realized is, if you have spent your entire career, if you've made it to a very senior position at a company as large as Coca-Cola, you likely have never been in a small business. That's not the normal career path. And so when we would talk to people, as much as they were clearly experts in the industry, they couldn't view the world at our scale, because they view a world where millions of truckloads of product move every minute. And Stacey and I were literally driving cases to customers in our car. That is not efficient, right? And so someone at Coca-Cola would just say, oh my gosh, that's not the way to do it. It is the way to do it when you're our size. And so, Stacey and I often comment that a lot of the solutions that are presented to small businesses as the way to do things are solutions that were designed for large enterprises, and then they are miniaturized. But the reality is small businesses are not miniature large companies. They're unique in the way that they think. They're unique in the way that they have to deliver. And so I think we quickly realized that on one hand, wow, there's so much expertise in that massive tower, but that expertise does not understand our scale. And so that's when we started finding people that were tied to Coca-Cola through the supply chain that maybe had worked for a bottler or that knew a filler. And we ended up talking to a gentleman named Mike McNally, who introduced us to a little water filling plant in rural Tennessee that could understand our world. And that's where we found traction. So don't assume you have to go to like the industry leader. Find somebody down the chain that understands your scale, because they can help you get there.
So let me ask this too. There was a notion that you raised in the book, and I've never really thought about this, but time kills all deals. And so I'd love for you to talk about that, because a lot of times you get these warm introductions. Someone is really excited about what you're doing, and if you're not diligent in following up, that really evaporates. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about that too, because again, those relationships that you're talking about, they're not always going to be there.
We have to remember that we're not the only one coming with an idea. You're not the only one coming with a sense of urgency, and you're not the only possibility for whomever you're having a conversation with. And the challenge is that we will present our idea because we sit with it, we marinate in it, we are excited about it, we've duct taped it together, we've got an artist friend to do a graphic rendering, and we know what it is. But we are in line behind whoever got to the meeting before us and whoever's following after us. And what tends to happen is that we wait. We wait for someone to call us back. We wait for someone to remember us. Or when we reach out, we don't reach out with additional information. It's the same information we gave before. And if that information was insufficient to generate immediate response, then your takeaway has to be, I need new information to reset the clock. Because over time, the excitement that got you the meeting starts to fade, but also there is a concern about whether or not there's value in their investment, because there's a receding finish line. And so time kills the deal when you are waiting, but also when you keep showing up on Groundhog's Day. And I've had these meetings, we've all had these meetings where someone's coming to tell us again what they're going to do. Every time you have the meeting, there needs to be some advance, even if it's a manufactured advance that means something only to you. You need to be able to show that you've made some progress, but you also have to recognize that it's your responsibility to get their attention, not their responsibility to give you their attention.
That's a great point. I mean, it's you're in business to make money, and no one's lining up, kind of to give you checks, right? That's not what they're in the business of doing. The other thing that I thought was really, really interesting, and Lara, I actually met your in-laws in Puerto Rico. I was doing a keynote speech in Puerto Rico. So that was great. We all have lives, right? And even if we're super and ultra focused, it sounds like both of you guys, and Stacey, it was really interesting to hear your story of, kind of, hey, I got this new gig as kind of minority leader, right? And it can't be the same that it was. So how do you guys think about each of you thinking about carving out time for the other things that are important in life?
Yeah, I think, we've created this unfortunate urban myth about entrepreneurship that you're supposed to disregard every other part of your life, live in your garage, eat macaroni and cheese, give every single thing you have to the business.
Don't sleep.
And I think that's unfortunate because it discourages a lot of incredibly potential entrepreneurs because they don't subscribe to that. And, I see it all the time when I work with, I'm an entrepreneur in residence. People will come to me of all backgrounds, men, women, younger, older, all races, et cetera, that will say, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I also want to get married. I want to have a family. I care for my aging parents. And we've created this assumption that if you have something else that's a priority in your life, that's a negative. I actually think it's the opposite. If I were an investor and I were going to invest in you, and you are willing to put the most important things in your life off to the side for your business, what that says to me is that you don't make wise choices. Why would I invest with you? And so I think, unfortunately, that is an assumption that's been promulgated by folks who made those bad choices, and I think they want company. For Stacey and I, she mentioned those rules that we set up front. One of those rules was that life comes first. And life for each of us is different. Life could be my child has a need that day. Life could be Stacey's sister or her parents have a need that day. That always comes first. And if we know the other person has that priority, we step in and back them up. No questions asked, no judgment.
I mean, we talk about, Lara and I have different ways of framing it. She uses a seesaw analogy. I use Jenga, but work-life balance is a lie. It is a lie that is foisted upon us that makes no sense. And Lara describes it as a seesaw because if everything's in balance, what fun is it? You're just dangling. I use Jenga because we are constantly pulling out different pieces of our lives. And the goal isn't to do everything the same. It's to pull it out and know that there's going to be a moment where you pull out the wrong piece and the whole thing falls, but that you can rebuild it. And part of our work relationship presumed that we were going to have multiple things stacking on top of each other. And we weren't always in control of what was next. You could be playing Jenga with 2 people. You could be playing Jenga with 5. Someone else had control over something that was in your stack. And that's life. And so for me, it was my political work. It was my writing. I write novels and have been writing for 20 years. Lara's known me for most of my writing career. She's actually in one of my books. And I have parents who are aging. I'm the second of 6 kids, and I have a very close-knit family. And so when things that happened were not predictable, what I could predict was that I could have the space to make change. But the other part was that I had the responsibility to make up for what I couldn't deliver. And so that, I think, is the place where there's tension often. When you can have things that threaten your ability to deliver, but you've got to own it. And so the one time we had real tension in our relationship was when all of my things were attacking at once and I forgot to flag. I forgot to say, Lara, I can't do all of this, or this is the thing that's going to diminish, in part because we had worked together for so long. I knew she would cover it, but my job was to say, I need you to cover it. Even if you get into the habit of relying on each other, you have to acknowledge the legitimate pressure because I don't know what's happening in her life. And when my ability to deliver started to diminish, my responsibility was to have the conversation about how do we cover it? Do we cover it with me? Do we reduce my salary and find someone else who can do more? What do we do to make this work? And so often we let life be the excuse for not communicating. And that's where small businesses get into trouble every day.
That's huge.
That's great advice. It's interesting because you also talk about the business insomnia being a human capital intensive business. And you're needing to scale, right? And so you talk about when to hire, but also how to hire. So I want to talk on the when to hire first, because again, it's really hard to replicate that size if it's just you, right? You can't serve all these masters at one time. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the when to hire, right? You know, how did you know, even in your business today, even at now, how do you know when to hire folks?
I'll start. So from insomnia now, the work that I've done at the state, I've had to hire people in different spaces. I was deputy city attorney. I have started a few nonprofit organizations that are of pretty large size. And the moment of hire is before it's a crisis. Hiring in a crisis is a terrible decision because you then pick the person who can solve your immediate problem, but you are picking from a limited pool. When you are solving a crisis with a hire, then you have already missed the time to hire. If you're watching your business grow, you start to hire when you can afford to have more support and when you can see a through line to more revenue. But do not hire before you can afford to pay someone. And that's a challenge a lot of businesses run into. They think, well, if I bring this person on, they will create new revenue for me. That's not the answer. You need to know where the revenue will come from if you bring this person on board. And this person should be a value add that leads to more money. It's often, unfortunately, why HR is last hired and needs to be really early on. Like it needs to be before you get to that second layer of CFO, CTO. But you need to bring someone in there because your HR is also going to cost you. The failure to think about who you hire and how you hire can actually cost you money in the long run. But the win is not in a crisis. It's when you see opportunity coming. That's when you need to start bringing people on.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add is this is probably one of the hardest things to answer, because when you get caught up in your business, you're so busy working in the business that it's really hard to step back and think about how to work on your business. And it's counterintuitive, but there's times when you're like, I'm too busy to hire somebody, right? Like I'm too busy to share the work because it seems like more work to get somebody else up to speed. So believe me, I've done it wrong. Stacey and I are, sometimes think we're superhuman, and we are more productive than the average person in terms of what we can accomplish in an hour. But I do think it is, as Stacey mentioned, being honest about, especially if you have someone else's money and you have promised to take that dollar and turn it into some larger number of dollars in a particular time frame, you have to acknowledge that you are the limiting factor. And so making sure that you get someone in time to get them up to speed so that they're productive and deliver in that time frame that you said you were going to deliver in.
Fantastic. So I'm gonna we're almost out of time here, which is quite unfortunate. I'm gonna have to make my way back to Atlanta. Luckily, my friend Andre is mayor. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that.
We've heard that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I'll be back there soon. But I want to keep on this hiring note because you also talk about hiring. Let me see what's the phrase here. Hiring mindsets over skill sets, right? And you guys seem to be a great example of that, right? You have different personalities, and it seems like it comes together in a mecha robot kind of form, right? You guys are greater than the sum of your parts. I'm curious, if you could articulate this hiring mindsets over skill sets theme.
Yeah, so the best way to articulate it is that we messed it up. I think it is very easy when you're starting a company to think functionally and say to yourself, okay, I need somebody with a legal background, and I need somebody with a technical background, and I need somebody who can do sales, and I need somebody who can do operations. And you can find the resumes that seem to build the Olympic team. They seem to create the all-star team. The problem is if you hire that group, and on paper, they are the all-star team of skills, but they haven't shared that mindset of what success looks like for them, how they plan to play a role in the company's success, then you are destined to go off in different directions. It's no different than a sports team. I can go get the absolute most skilled people, does not mean they will win a national championship until they figure out how to create a common goal and work towards that. So Stacey and I had done such a good job of that with one another, but then sometimes when we brought others on, we were so impatient that maybe we didn't spend the same amount of time with those folks, and we ended up doing ourselves and them a disservice. Great.
So I'm going to do one thing. Again, I've been enjoying reading the book. So I am going to put in the chat. There's a bookstore here in LA called SO1, which is right in Leimert Park. They have your book for sale. I'm going to put that in the chat, and they sell online too, right? So I've been enjoying it. I want everyone else to enjoy it too. I really appreciate you guys coming in. I think that you're both incredible. We want to be part of helping both of you, right? Both the companies and Stacey, we have your back, right? So know that anytime you need to come and speak to some really incredible Black professionals, the Valence community is your home. So really thank you guys. Lara, look forward to seeing you in Atlanta, and Stacey, look forward to meeting you face to face someday.
Thank you so much, guys. This has been delightful.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.